I was also in Singapore attending the AT Kearney. Actually, they have a global CEO retreat. We're talking with 30, 40 CEOs. I mean, they're still very bullish on China. They're still, of course, they have concerns and worries, but in the long run, they all want to continue. We don't want to abandon this biggest middle-class market. And I actually even made a proposal at the Munich Security Conference saying that we should have a G3 summit or G3 ministerial meetings so that European countries, EU, can mediate the relations between China and the US. China can help European mediate Ukraine-Russian war, but European can help China mediate China-US relations. Since we do not belong to any particular ministry or province, we end up so many government departments coming to CCG for advice. Because if you belong to one department, you can only report through that department, which limits your policy impact. Whereas CCG has many channels, many ways to report our findings, so we can really get more feedbacks and really provide better policy advisory to different departments of the government.
Welcome to the Ginger River Radio Podcast, a part of the GRR Media Outlet, and your go-to podcast for anything about the Chinese current events. I'm your host, Jiang Jiang, the founder of Ginger River Review, a newsletter that focuses on reporting the priorities of both the leadership and the general public in China, and views you do not normally see from mainstream English language media. If you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, go to www.gingerriver.com and sign up to join our community of avid China watchers. Now, let's dive into our podcast show today. China optimizes its COVID epidemic prevention and control policies at the end of last year. China's then Vice Premier Liu He, who is regarded by many China watchers as Beijing's then top economic advisor, tells Davos CEOs in January this year that China is back. On March 6, representatives from Iran and Saudi Arabia met in Beijing for discussions brokered by China. On April 26, Chinese President Xi Jinping on Wednesday held phone talks with his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky since the Russia-Ukraine conflict and said China will send a special representative on Eurasian affairs to visit Ukraine and other countries to conduct in-depth communications with all parties on the political settlement of the crisis. Meanwhile, some Chinese think tanks have been actively engaged in Track 2 diplomacy trips, or back-channel diplomacy, which is the practice of non-governmental, informal, and unofficial contacts and activities between private citizens and groups of individuals, sometimes called non-state actors. Join me to talk about China's post-pandemic diplomacy and Track 2 diplomacy today is Dr. Wang Huiyao, who is the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, CCG, a leading non-governmental think tank in Beijing. Wang worked for 3 years in China's Ministry of Foreign Trade, the predecessor to the Ministry of Commerce, in the 1980s. He then became one of the first group of Chinese nationals to get an MBA degree in North America and later joined Canadian businesses. He founded CCG in 2008 in his lifelong mission to bridge China and the rest of the world. As his non-governmental think tank gained domestic and international prominence, Wang became 国务院参事, counselor to the China's State Council, essentially an advisor to the Chinese government cabinet, at the accreditation of the then Premier Li Keqiang. Perhaps the most well-connected and respected intellectual between China and the West, Wang was described by The Economist in October 2022 as a go-between for technocratic government ministries, Chinese entrepreneurs, and foreign embassies in Beijing. Hi, Henry. 您好，王会长. Welcome to Ginger River Radio. It's great to meet you here face-to-face at CCG's office in Beijing.
Thank you. Yeah, great to meet you too. Yes, thank you.
I'm so glad to have you, and I really appreciate you taking time to have this podcast chat with me before your very busy trip. We know that China's face-to-face diplomacy and interaction with the rest of the world resumes. I think maybe after the fourth quarter of last year, especially after China optimized its COVID response. And recently, the CCG has released its 2022 annual report with the first section focusing on breaking the ice in 3 continents by restarting face-to-face meetings and leveraging Track 2 diplomacy. As the president of CCG, you have been actively engaged in Track 2 diplomacy trips and have made many ice-breaking journeys. In your exchanges with foreign governments and think tanks personnel, where do you feel they have the biggest gap in understanding Chinese policies compared to reality? And can you share with us some of the work that you have done to help bridge this cognitive gap, especially considering that the COVID pandemic in the past 3 years have created some obstacles for cross-cultural communication in the world?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for talking to me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to exchange with you. I think that it is actually, 3 years of COVID pandemic is really unprecedented in the history, probably in the modern history of mankind. And I'm very glad that just recent days that WHO announced that finally the COVID-19 would not be regarded as a massive pandemic. So for that, a massive pandemic alert has been lifted. What I think, but however, I think the damage has done. For the last 3 years, because of China and the outside world, there's no exchanges, particularly no face-to-face exchanges. The border is basically closed off, and very few people can travel and come in and out. And so that has actually intensified the misunderstanding and mistrust. For example, there's no high-level visit between China and the U.S., China and Europe, and China and many other countries. And then we have only microphone democracy, and that is really people talking over each other rather than face-to-face with each other. So we found that it is really kind of a very unpleasant situation and an unfriendly situation actually occurring between China and many other countries, particularly the United States. So we actually, Center for China and Globalization as a non-government think tank, we embarked on a kind of first probably think tank delegation ever during these 3 years to visit 6 countries.
What are they?
Yeah, 6 countries. We started with Asia. We went to Singapore. We went to United States. We went to then we went to France. We went to Germany and Brussels in Belgium, and then come back through South Korea. So basically, it's a around the world global trip across 3 continents, 6 countries in 30 days. With almost 100 events, meetings, and meet several hundred people in the process, attending conferences and talking to different people. And we found that is extremely useful, extremely helpful to have this people-to-people exchange and face-to-face meetings. For example, one of the things we're surprised to find that there's a huge interest wants to know what's going on in China, for this pandemic situation. How does the people cope inside? And we tell the stories and share our experiences. And also, on the other hand, we find the perception on China has dramatically changed. The sentiment is also very low, coupled with the Russian-Ukraine war. And there's many different ratings on China's. One of the biggest misunderstanding, probably I find, is that they think China has conspired with Russia to invade Ukraine, which I think is very much over-reading into China-Russian statement. When China and Russia have this February 4th statement in last year, they would basically say, the cooperation is unlimited, or we often say that, friendship is boundless, sky's the limit, or, friendship is everlasting. So that is saying to most countries when they have a joint communique like that. So I think there's a lot of perception that China is really worked with Russian to invade Ukraine, which Chinese citizen was the last to pull out of Kyiv. If Chinese would conspire that, would knew beforehand, China would probably put out its citizen in the first place. So there's some different understanding like that we have to explain. And the other thing we found was, to our surprise, is that Chinese student was very much wanted in the United States and everywhere. For example, there's 300,000 students registered in U.S. campus. And anywhere we go, Chinese students still very much wanted. So that's makes me think that we should send more students, welcome more foreign students to come, and of course there is also business concerns whether they should continue to invest in China, should they have a plan B, and what about Chinese position in Taiwan, and also with neighboring countries. So we did a lot of explanation, and provide think tank analysis, assessment. So they found very helpful to have that. We met so many think tanks, association, chambers, government, and we found this face-to-face meeting. And also it's good for us to know what's really thinking in the United States, in the European countries, and in Asia. So it was good learning window for us. I was also in Singapore attending AT Kearney. Actually, they have a global CEO retreat. I was talking with 30, 40 CEOs. I mean, they're still very bullish on China. They're still, of course, they have concerns and worries, but in the long run, they all want to continue. They don't want to abandon this biggest middle-class market. And one of the things we found is that they all want to do business with China, but of course, they want some caution. They want some diversification, but overall, they still want to work with this biggest market in the world. And so we found many good things, and I think this trip has sent a signal. We set a good example for Chinese NGOs, think tanks, Chinese people to come out. And so it was really people receiving us. Oh, China was finally starting to let people out. For example, we were in Paris. We were at Lafayette, the biggest department store there. Say, oh, you are the first mainlanders from China. We've been seeing the last 3 years. Finally, we see some true mainland Chinese coming out. So we also send a signal. And when we come back, after our coming back, there was more Chinese visits started, and think tanks and all the people-to-people exchanges.
What time was the 6 trips you made, like last year?
Yeah.
In which month?
We started our trip in late June, like June 24, and we finished on July 24. So exactly 30 days, in which we spent 10 days in the U.S., 10 days in Europe, and another 10 days, 8-9 days in Asia. So it was extremely helpful. And then we actually went out again in November. We went to Europe again. We went to Paris, Brussels, Berlin, and also Singapore. And so we conducted another trip to attend a number of conferences. For example, we went to Paris Peace Forum. We went to also New Economy Forum in Singapore. We went to a number of in Brussels. We had a meeting with our counterpart, European Policy Center, and things like that. So it's extremely important that we maintain this kind of people-to-people and think tank-to-think tank exchanges, so that we can clarify things, we can find out what went wrong, and also we feed back our findings and to the different departments, government, and then to advise them what should be the proper policy that is more productive, engaging our different international affairs. So I think this kind of a mission is very helpful. And also we renewed our old acquaintance and, of course, made new friends. And then we invite many of them coming back. So we find that at the think tank level is very useful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can say that you actually are the pioneers of the people who opened the bridge at an early time, comparatively speaking, almost like the first half of last year. Then other people, they followed your suit and they went there, and there are more and more interactions. And yeah. you also mentioned that actually you are not just go there, you also bring some feedback back, which is actually constructive to the policy. So actually my next question is that, because I noticed that the CCG annual report said that in 2022, CCG submitted 67 policy recommendations, 11 research reports, and 14 insider reports, conducted 21 exchanges with government agencies, and participated in over 20 closed-door meetings on policy recommendations. And these recommendations were related to issues such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the COVID response policy, and China-U.S. relations. So you touched a little bit on that just now, and if possible, could you share with us some of the concrete roles or concrete efforts that non-governmental think tanks such as CCG played in this China's decision-making system?
Yeah. No, before coming to that, I'll just add, the time when we went out last year was extremely, one of the things that when those Chinese went out, there was people still very fearful of the COVID. They were, for example, everywhere you go in China, you have to do PCR test, you have to wear your mask, and it's a very tight situation. And then one of the things I remember is that you have to go through all the troubles to get quarantined when you come back.
There are many closed-loop management
in
lots of cities in China.
Exactly, and then we is particularly also the date. We went on in June. That was just Shanghai. Resumed some contact. It was after 2 months of a shutdown in Shanghai. Has a huge impact, and then that is also before Beijing starting to really getting some outbreaks like that, and so it is very very tense moment, very worrisome moment, and very risky moment for many people. Say, how dare you? You can still travel to different parts of the world, and also China-U.S. relation was also very tense, and of course, and also COVID is we never knowing what's going on outside. So there has to have some risk taking to really embark that trip, and so that was very, very memorable and a very unforgettable experience. Now, coming back to your question about during last year the activities, policy briefings, activities we conducted, I can give you a few examples. Just talk about COVID-19, for example. We actually at end of April and beginning of May, when the Shanghai COVID-19 situation getting out of control and then local shutdown starting to happen, CCG organized an indoor brief meeting. We invited Gao Fu. He's the director of China, CDC director for the Ministry of Health that looks at Central Disease Control Center, right? And then we had invited the bureau chief of World Bank in China. He now is the vice president of the World Bank. And then we invited the former WHO chief representative in China. He was a German health official with the German embassy. And then the World Bank also invited, there are two experts. One is from New Zealand, look after all the recovery experience of New Zealand, Singapore. And then there's another one from Australia, I remember. So basically at that time, we talk about how can we avoid this kind of a COVID situation to really make better policy on that. So after internal consultation, the recommendation that we have is that we should probably vaccine people as soon as we can, particularly the senior people. We should also, not really use so much investment on building a temporary hospital, but use that investment to build up the intensive ICU beds and infrastructure of the hospital, to have more beds in the form to really cope with these serious cases. And then we have another recommendation is that maybe we should import vaccination to have a mixed vaccine for different people so that we can have better results to fight COVID. For example like that, we have internal policy recommendations we send to different departments. That's one example. The other example is that we actually, during our, also in the middle of the year, we had about 20 ambassadors we invited to come to CCG office. We had an ambassador roundtable, and all the ambassadors talk about how policy has impacted them. This COVID policy. For example, the Swiss ambassador said, "Look, he's still issuing several thousand, 2,000 Chinese visas to visit, Switzerland, student visa, for example. But then there's only 100 Swiss left in China." So he was saying, look, so this is really bad for exchanges. And then many ambassadors actually always share the same story. And then I think about 10 days after that, after our roundtable, we actually also made an internal report on collecting all the ambassadors.
That was in May? Or?
That was, I think it was in May, probably in May. And May or June, I forgot, but it's the mid-year. But then after that, China cut down its quarantine from, I forgot, it's 21 days or to 14 days, or probably to 10 days. So you see, it does make a lot of differences. And one of the biggest, I think, policy impact is that we've been really exemplified by our own actions. Like we went to those countries, 6 countries. We published hundreds of articles, papers, and all those things. I even wrote an op-ed in the Financial Times that said zero COVID policy will impact China's global talent movement. Op-ed that suggests China should open as soon as we can. And so all those activities actually had a very positive feedback. I think we talked to different ministries. They actually starting to gradually relax in travel, encouraging university scholars, think tanks, other different companies, encourage them to go abroad and have more exchanges. So we take the lead and example to do that, and that really helped more positive reflection of the situation, and then there's more positive policy has been made to encourage more people-to-people exchanges. For example, student exchange also, we were making a lot of recommendations to the government. So Chinese government, U.S. embassy, French embassy, every embassy starting to relax foreign student visa to China, or let them return to China. For example, we met the embassy in the Chinese embassy in the United States, Ambassador Qin, and we met the Chinese ambassador in France, Ambassador Lu. They also tell me that they are having more measures taken to put back more foreign students coming back to China. So things like that. We've been really become a messenger. We're really promoting and expediting and reflecting the situation. So we find that very unique role that we're trying to bridge and trying to promote the exchanges.
Yeah, I think all those efforts are very impressive and very helpful. And actually, I'm glad to see that the Chinese decision-making system is actually can incorporate different ideas, different suggestions, took advices from different organizations, and to make a comprehensive decision. Because it's important to know the whole situation. Mm-hmm. And we just mentioned that the leaders of China and the Ukraine recently had their first conversation after more than a year since the outbreak of Russia-Ukraine conflict. CCG and the CITIC Press co-host a launch event for the new book of Harvard professor Joseph Nye, father of soft power, titled Soft Power and Great Power Competition, Shifting Sands in the Balance of Power Between the United States and China. And in Nye's speech, the professor said that China's efforts to promote peace talks are widely welcomed. So how do you evaluate the interaction and communication between the leaders of China and Ukraine? And what are your expectations and evaluations for China's potential role in helping solve the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Yeah, this is very interesting. Actually, as a think tank, CCG pays a huge attention to this Russian-Ukraine war situation. As a matter of fact, when the war just broke out last year in late February, I published an op-ed in New York Times at the beginning of March to call for more mediation from China to really help to broker peace for this crisis. And I'm very glad. I mean, exactly 1 year late, China launched this peace proposal, which a 12-point position paper, to call for more peace and mediation. And so what I see is that that's exactly also one of the points when we went out, visiting different countries, people very often ask that. So I would say, China has a unique role. China is the only, second largest country, only the big country, not directly involved in this conflict. You have Russia on one side and Ukraine on the other side, but behind Ukraine you have NATO, you have West countries. So in fact, Russia is fighting the whole West countries. And China is only third party, not really significant enough, not involved. And so that provides China a unique opportunity to mediate, to talk. And I'm extremely happy that President Xi called President Zelensky just recently, and also, of course, President Xi has maintained his dialogue with President Putin. So that's positioned China in a unique position to really make this peace together. And what I think is actually things can be really going forward is that I proposed in my last year March op-ed at New York Times, which I'm calling for 7-party talks. China used to have a lot of experience to run 6-party talks on the nuclear proliferation of North Korea. And so I think that if we can have a 7-party, which means permanent 5-member countries of United Nations, plus Ukraine, plus EU, that's 7 parties. And the 7-party, we should have a UN, peace summit, inviting the 7 heads of probably those countries to come to UN, and let's really talk about how we can, make a peace on the issue. So I think we have internally given the advice to the government many times and have roundtables talking. So I think Chinese position is very clear. China, first of all, respects Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Number one, that's very important. Number two, China, against using nuclear weapons on this war, or destroy nuclear power plants or chemical weapons. That's really limited that to a very, conventional war, so that we don't suffer huge casualties by triggering a nuclear war on that. Thirdly, is China firmly against bombarding, destroy of shooting the civilians or women or children, there should be no target of those civilians as a target. So those very strong statement, basically very strong statement. I think really apply to this war, to limit this war to a very conventional basic war, and then so that we can easily solve that. And then what I think China has made it very clear is that would like to see promoting the peace and try to mediate. So I think that we also see the French President Macron came just not too long ago. We actually also talked to different international representatives to also express Chinese think tanks' views. For example, we received foreign delegations, different embassy visits, ambassador visits very often. Actually, Mr. Borrell, the High Commissioner of High Representative of European Foreign Affairs and Vice Chairman of European Affairs, actually scheduled a speech at the CCG also, but because of COVID, he said he published his speech, which said he could not deliver at the CCG. So I think you can see CCG as a think tank, not only talking to the Chinese government, but also talking to the foreign government representative and trying to make a peace. And we actually received before there's no ambassador of Ukraine in China. So Charge d'Affaires of Ukrainian embassy in Beijing paid a visit to CCG. And she said, look, there's not many Chinese organization wants to see us or really warmly receive us. CCG is the only think tank. They actually find that not only seeing them, but
also...
Is the
visit before the phone call?
It's visited before the phone call, actually. He said they found the situation in China is a little bit, people are sensitive, people are sometimes shied away from the meeting proposals. So they will very much appreciate that CCG is willing to host them, to meet them, and we take photos, we publish news. It was really, and then we discuss many issues. Of course, Ukrainian also felt, of course, it's not a status quo that we stop peace deal there. We have to have a plan, action plan, as to what can be done. They were asking CCG, what are the recommendations? I mean, we actually, say, look, you have to, you really have to talk. Of course, we're not saying to recognize status quo, but you have to talk. But for example, whether, some of the territory like Crimea, Russia and Israel have should maybe be neutral, and also Donbass and other areas that Russian occupied could be neutral on the Ukraine side and maybe give back to the Ukrainian. So there's many things can be done, or maybe sanction can be lifted, or China can participate in the reconstruction of the Ukraine with other countries. AIIB and World Bank can work things out. And so the territory issue, they can really give and take, and then they can find some middle ground if possible, or maybe or declare neutrality, and or also whether NATO is going to recruit Ukraine or not, or Ukraine is applying for that. So there's many issues can be discussed beforehand and form some kind of consensus before we have this peace summit and have and then we can make that in New York, in Geneva, in Paris, in Beijing. China can play active role, just like China has broke the deal for Iranian and Saudis, right? Also recently. So I think there's if the parties of the conflict of both sides come into the table, but China is sitting at the table. I mean, I'm sure they will say, okay, we have to give face to China. We have to really reach some compromise. We have to give and take. We have to really calm down. We can't just have the status quo. We need to, make understanding and solving this crisis. So I think the Chinese role is enormous, and you can see CCG is really playing a great role in terms of bridging this gap, at least on the think tank community.
Yeah, I think the seven parties initiative, I think that would be great if they can, sit down together, talk with each other. And you mentioned about like EU is also an important part of this whole negotiation. And actually, my next question is going to ask, we know that the China-Europe relations are another important international relations. You mentioned that Joseph Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and the Vice President of the European Commission, he was originally scheduled to come to give a speech, but because he was sick, he got tested positive for COVID, and he published his speech instead. And he said, in the speech, he said, "We do not fear China's rise." So what do you think is the most pressing issue in current China-Europe relations? Is the Russia-Ukraine conflict the most pressing issue? And do you think there is still a possibility for the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, the CAI, to be restored?
Yes, I think there's a huge room of improvement now for China-EU relations, because first of all, we had this COVID situation lifted. China opened up, since beginning of this year, and actually since last year, before opened up, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz came to Beijing with a 10 hours visit. That is really an ice-breaking visit, because at that time, Germany is still the chair of G7 countries, one of the major countries in the EU, and then that is very, very important big visit. And then since then, we had a parade of a number of European leaders come. We had Spanish Prime Minister, we had the French President, we had the European President and chairmen, and also we have Italian Prime Minister coming. So there's many European leaders have come to China. Particularly Germany and France. So what I think that China-EU relation can be, after those consultations, discussions, they find that, of course, ideologically, maybe value-wise, and they lean towards more U.S., maybe for the security, for some extent. But economically, business and the future potential cooperation, they have to, work with China, because that's where the future market is, and that's a 500 million middle-class market that no European companies would neglect. And as many European companies are already doing more business in China than in their own countries, or even more than they are in Europe. For example, a number of automakers sells more cars in China than their own countries. So exactly, they are different. They haven't gone as far as U.S. position, I would say, but I was really proposing, I think it was also well received in many think tanks in Europe, is that we should really follow this G3 concept. Of course, there's many other important countries, but in general, the three largest economy in the world is the US, China, and EU. So basically, if we think that we have a G3, which means the European is not a China versus West, or West versus rest, is because each continent has its uniqueness. For example, European has thousands of history, has no bordering issue with China, has a friendly relation with China, and we can always compare to improve. There's also no European countries is fighting for number one, number two seats in terms of dominance that U.S. fears that maybe it's not losing to China. Which China doesn't think China is going to dominate the world. So I think in that sense, if this G3 concept, if there's a more strategic autonomy European countries to practice, that will really help to steer European a better position. So basically, they can get a best of the two worlds between China and the U.S. And I actually even made a proposal at the Munich Security Conference saying that we should have a G3 summit or G3 ministerial meetings, so that European countries, EU, can mediate the relations between China and the U.S. China can help European mediate Ukraine-Russian war, but European can help China mediate China-U.S. relations. So there's need on both sides, so they are different. Europe is not American, American not the U.S. So and European is not China, and China is not European either. So I think this is really great to have this trilateral relation, which is more stable, rather than bilateral confrontation between China and the West. So I think European country has made a huge, contribution in terms of diversify, in terms of a stabilized world political situation and geopolitical situation. So I think it's very significant Chancellor Scholz and President Macron's visit, and also Spanish Prime Minister's visit to China has set the tune for this European autonomy, and doesn't want to follow 100% on the U.S. for many of the issues, and also wants to maintain its own autonomy in doing business with China. So that I think this is great for future to develop on China-European relations. As far as the CAI is concerned, comprehensive agreement on investment, I think it's really unfortunate to see that being shelved. But I think now, Chinese ambassador to European country has said, China can lift this sanction. China probably sanctioned a bit heavily, but China can lift that, and see if European can also lift that too, or they have a better proposal to make. And I think also, China also mentioned they welcome European ambassadors, journalists, or businessmen to visit Xinjiang. That's where all the sanction comes from. So I think things can be probably improved with more dialogue, exchanges, and also importantly that this sanction can be lifted, and then I think CAI can be really finalized. Because CAI actually, this comprehensive agreement on investment, using the former European ambassador Nicolas Chapi, he told me in my office that this is the second China opening up. China has given more, to European countries that China has not given to the United States, and so European companies will benefit hugely, and for their market expansion in China, and many issues that European companies complain about. This new investment agreement will take care of that. So I think it's really important that we revive that, and also important that we should have these parliament members of European countries which has blocking this deal welcome to visit China. Welcome them to visit, and also by 2024 they're going to have a new European Parliament, and probably by then we'll see more exchanges, more understanding, and more cooperation, and then this still eventually can be passed through the Parliament, and then China certainly would love to see this new agreement taking effect and make the bilateral business relation, investment situation even better improved for the future.
Yeah, I do believe that China and Europe relations has lots of potential, and the CAI it can benefit both sides a lot. And now let's move on to the topic of China-U.S. relations. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had planned to visit China earlier this year, but the visit was postponed due to the balloon incident, which is, somehow affected China-U.S. relations maybe. And in an article recently published by CCG, you mentioned that the U.S. Congress has probably never played a greater role in U.S.-China relations. Since the 118th U.S. Congress took office in January, lawmakers have proposed a series of long bills related to China, and they met with Tsai Ing-wen in the U.S. and Taiwan. They questioned the CEO of TikTok and established new special committees and labeled the ruling party of China as a survival threat to the U.S. So what is the current level of contact between China and U.S. Congress according to your knowledge? And what does China lack of in terms of having a good interaction with the U.S. Congress? Or is there anything that you think China can do to improve its relation with the U.S. Congress?
Yes, absolutely. I think it can. I published this op-ed last month at South China Morning Post, which I'm calling for more U.S. congressmen and senators to visit China. I actually had a dialogue with, former U.S. representative in Taiwan, Douglas Paul, and the former Assistant Secretary of State Department, Susan Sontag. And during the dialogue, I was calling to invite, Speaker Kevin McCarthy to visit China mainland, because at that time there was rumor that he's going to visit Taiwan. I said, why not visit China's mainland? And so I think that proposal, further, I actually wrote an op-ed to further promote that. I think extremely important, even during the difficult time in the past. There's always congressmen, senators visit China, and even during the non-diplomatic times, we had Nixon, such a strong anti-communist figure visit China also. So, and I see the situation is getting a little imbalanced. For example, you have almost 40 congressmen, senators visit Taiwan, but no single one visit China mainland. So that's really unusual and unnecessary. And you're right, so since they don't come, and then they still live in a kind of fears or hype that they think China is really going to be dominant, going to be really China is collapsing, or China is doing very bad. So that's to simplify, or this binary autocracy versus democracy. I think the problem between China and the U.S. on some of those is that the U.S. is practicing this view of a democracy versus autocracy. Since Taiwan is a democracy, then we have to defend it. We have to support it. We have to really work together against autocracy. So, but then they've abandoned the 3 communiques that they have established with China through the 5 presidents before, that there's only one China, U.S. recognizes Taiwan as part of China, and U.S. doesn't want to maintain official ties. So those are really fundamental basic, and that's the prerequisite for China to establish diplomatic ties with 181 countries. So it's very important that I think we keep this status quo and this tradition that we had. And so that's why it's important to have more U.S. congressmen to visit China. And but China, on the other hand, has, even though we are not totally have the American system or Western system, but the system works in China fine. We have lifted 800 million people out of poverty. We have actually contributed over 1/3 of the GDP growth for the last 10 years, 20 years. China has actually also become the second largest donor to the United Nations and many international organizations. China actually also built 2/3 of global speed railway, very, very developed now and very stable, prosperous, which is good for the world trade, and become the largest trading nation with 140 countries. So if this system works well in China, and we shouldn't really make that a binary world as only your style or there's non-style, or my way or no way, So I think if U.S. can think like that, tolerate a little bit different system, rather than view anything different than theirs is autocracy, and then so probably they will not really so support of Taiwan, and then they would really abide by their commitment that Taiwan is part of China and should maintain no official ties. So they're not supposed to provoke in China, by sending all high-level visits, even Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. And then China has to protest, has to provoke China to do some military exercise of flying across mid-line and things like that. So it's a chicken and egg. If there's more doing of that, and then there's more visit, and more visit, there's more exercise. And then even U.S. now conducted a large exercise with Australia and Philippines recently. I mean, that's really making things worse. So I think fundamentally we have to, like Joseph Nye or Graham Allison told me, that we have to have a cooperative, competition or cooperative rivalry. We recognize there's competition, but we have to cooperate. But let's not really talking more competition, rivalry, really, self-fulfilling prophecy, we may get into a hot war. So I think particularly on this Taiwan issue is very sensitive, is core interest of China, and that we should not really intensify by having so many high-level visits. And China should also come down to responding in this military exercise. But I think that if we can maintain status quo, a peaceful reunification is there, because there are already 2 million Taiwanese living in the mainland. There are several 100,000 husbands and wives living in Taiwan, married with Chinese mainlanders, and of course thousands of student exchanges. Taiwan enjoying largest trade surplus with China, and they share the same language, culture, heritage, tradition. Eventually, they're going to be integrated through economic integration. So So I think that peaceful reunification is still the priority of Chinese government, and only the separatist independence that those extreme cases that China has to take some measure under foreign heavy influence. But other than that, I'm sure the Chinese across the street will eventually work out among themselves. A good example about recent Ma Ying-jeou visit mainland has been welcomed everywhere, and a lot of goodwill has been built. So I'm sure we keep that momentum. The two sides across Taiwan Strait will eventually work together.
Yeah, obviously, Taiwan is the core interest of China and China-U.S. relations. And on the other hand, there are also many other issues. And I noticed that you also attach great importance to the issue of data security. And I believe many people have watched the Zhou Shouzi TikTok, the CEO of TikTok. He was questioned by the U.S. Congress. And in your article in South China Morning Post, you said that U.S. concerns about China's data security should be addressed, but not with a TikTok ban. And in another piece in Global Times, you pointed out that some Western media are hyping up the potential challenges that Chinese cars may pose to U.S. national data security, which shows ignorance of China's global initiative on data security proposed more than 2 years ago. So nowadays, we know that the Chinese electric vehicle industry is developing very fast, both domestically and overseas. Do you think Chinese cars, especially the electric vehicle companies, will eventually face some similar or the same level of Western pressure or even a ban as the TikTok and Huawei faced? Is there a way that to avoid this outcome and maybe benefit both sides?
Yeah, absolutely. There's many ways to improve that. I think there's this situation is really getting worse and worse is because there's lacking of trust. I think there's a lot of mistrust there, and then there's a lot of hype and suspicious on both sides. And a good example is Huawei. I mean, I was at a Munich Security Conference last February, and they were saying, look, I mean, there were antenna for the television broadcasting was made by Huawei, and it must be have some surveillance or spy type of functions. But I was really thinking, look, I mean, there are so many things made in China. I mean, for example, 95% of Apple phone, iPads, and all those gadgets were made in China and are used throughout the world. I mean, if you talk about iPhone, so sophisticated, it is 100% made in China, and nobody talk about those phone or computers made in China has any security issue. Only Huawei antenna has some problem. So I think we need to really get rid of those mistrust. But of course, I understand there are some treaties like in China which stipulate some courses made of foreign companies worry or foreign government more alert. But also Chinese government, for example, on the data flow, China has been really gradually more open. For example, you mentioned about 2 years ago, China Ministry of Foreign Affairs made a very strong statement saying that all the Chinese company operates overseas has no obligation to turn back any data, any information they have. It's not allowed. Chinese government would not allow that. It's an open statement by Minister of Foreign Affairs. So you can't just, there's one article in such a certain document, legal document said this. You have to see really overall picture. So I think in that case, China is really committed not to interfere in companies' activities internationally, and there's no need for them to turn back any material data, whatever. So this is formally announced by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and State, at that time State Councilor Wang Yi, now the party bureau chief, political bureau chief member, highest foreign diplomat in China. And also, what I think is not only that, China is also looking for a way to address that. For example, China not only joined RCEP, but China also applying to join CPTPP, which there's a huge number of course articles on data flow that you have to open to join that. So China has a lot of mentality and conceptual transition and changes. For example, maybe 10 years ago, China think, everything on data it should be closed, it should be more keep in your box. And then,
very sensitive.
Very sensitive also. Yeah. But now you find that data is the 21st century petroleum. You have to let it flow in order to make wealth. And China is the second largest digital economy in the world, and China has the largest digital application scene in the world. And out of those digital infrastructure, for example, 4G, 5G stations, China has 6 million of them throughout the country, very advanced in terms of digital infrastructure. So they generate a huge amount of data daily with 1.4 billion people. You have to use it. You have to really make that beneficial to the mankind, to the world. And of course, we have to keep, privacy and identity safe. But other than that, those data should be contributing to the next boom of globalization. And so China is also applying to join DIPA, a digital partnership agreement proposed by New Zealand, Singapore, and Chile. So China is actually looking for joining CPTPP and DIPA as a way to upgrade their digital policy, data flow policy. And President Xi announced that China wants to join those things. I think that international community we all work together. US, EU, and ASEAN, maybe Australia, Japan, Canada. Let's all work together. WTO, for example. So I think that China also lead the e-commerce discussion at the WTO. So I think that it's not that China wants to hack your data or maybe don't let the data flow. They want it, but maybe there's a lack of communication, exchanges, and international agreement how to do it. I think it used to be, U.S. is leading that. Now U.S. is not leading that, and so maybe we should. That's why I'm saying G3. China, EU, and the U.S. should all come together and talk about that. And then particularly, one of the advice is why not U.S. coming back to CPTPP? China wants to join CPTPP, and let's conduct negotiations on the CPTPP platform. UK has just joined the CPTPP, so we make a mini digital WTO on CPTPP, and then get all the data flow, security, privacy issues resolved with new high 21st century new standards, so that every country can benefit, and so we do not have so many security alliances. Let's do more economic globalization, more economic alliance, rather than we have all those AUKUS or Quad and all those security, which I think is not really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Data is definitely growing more and more important in the world, and China has actually established its National Data Bureau according to a plan released during the just concluded 2 sessions months ago. And we also know that, because what you have just introduced, lots of things are related to your the personal experience, your face-to-face communications with all these Western or international scholars and think tanks. So in your opinion, what are the differences between Chinese and foreign think tanks? And what are the main opportunities and challenges faced by Chinese think tanks focusing on international issues?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Certainly, the international think tank, especially American think tank and some European think tank have a very long history. They probably have over 100 years history. If you think about, first think tank is over 100 years already. Think like Brookings, CSIs or Chatham House, they all have a very long history. And but I think that China also is having a think tank boom too, because the hardware has been built up there. Infrastructure is all in place now. The soft power, like Joseph and I was telling me last week during our dialogue, is that we need more refreshment of the soft power, and the think tank is a key component of this soft power, and for reach consensus, to setting agenda and making proposals, making advisory, policy shaping, and all those things. So I think China now has, according to the University of Pennsylvania Global Think Tank Index, there's almost 2,000 think tanks in the United States. There's about 1,400 in China. But I think the problem for Chinese think tanks is still there's largely run by government or supported by government. I think China needs more think tank like CCG, like Center for China Globalization. For example, our think tank is a non-government think tank. We're really supported by the companies, by the business, and by the our publications, our events, sponsorship, just like a U.S. think tank or European think tank. So we should have more diversified think tank of that. One of the things that China is lacking is that I think Chinese entrepreneur and Chinese corporate world they are getting used to support some poverty alleviation. They are not thinking about how to maybe help on the policy, research, poverty alleviation. Because they are getting used to donate to the rural school, and then build up a new Hope School in the countryside. But that's fine. You build up a new countryside school, solve several hundred student or pupils' study. But if you're really supporting a policy research for education, that can benefit thousands or millions of students. So I think there is still not yet a tradition like Western countries, like US and Europe, that entrepreneurs and the business like to donate to think tank. Like Brookings was an entrepreneur. Brookings, he donated the Brookings Institute, become a famous think tank. Carnegie is an entrepreneur. He donated the Carnegie think tank. So I don't think there's a think tank in China that named entrepreneur. So I think we need to really revive that spirit to support more think tank development in China. That's why CCG is unique, because we have 200 corporate members. Corporate and individual members. We have 100 events in China. We got a lot of sponsorship for events. So that gives us autonomy to setting the agenda, and no donor can exceed in 10%. So our editorial autonomy is maintained, and so we can really, getting our own agenda. We don't need any really consult so many people, so we can make quick decisions, make it really efficient. And I think, so the difference between China, US, and European think tanks, I think American think tanks, many are self-funded, and they are funded by society and business community. Some European think tanks are also funded by government. For example, Germany, there's many political parties. Each political party has a foundation to support their think tanks too. So there's a little different. And also Chinese think tanks are largely, many of them are funded by government, and then you have really some exceptions like CCG. So we should have more CCG type of think tank in China. We have some now, but I think we should have more. Of course, we have a good relation with the government. Since we do not belong to any particular ministry or province, we end up so many government departments coming to CCG for advice. Because if you belong to one department, you can only report through that department, which limits your policy impact. Whereas CCG has many channels, many ways to report our findings, so we can really get more feedbacks and really providing better policy advisory to different departments of the government. So I think in that sense, I think we should have more non-government think tank or non-profit think tank like CCG in China. So that is really good for China to build up its soft power.
Yeah, a follow question would be, you mentioned that there are like 200 corporations cooperating with CCG, right? And I noticed that some senior entrepreneurs, such as Cao Wang, chairman of Huiyao Group, one of the largest glass manufacturers in the world, and Liang Jianzhang, one of the co-founders and executive chairman of the board of Trip.com. So they are, both of them are the senior vice president of CCG. How do you view the help from the Chinese entrepreneurs for the development of CCG and Chinese think tank industry in general? You mentioned a little bit on that. Are there any insights and valuable ideas that you find particularly refreshing or valuable in your interaction with all these great entrepreneurs?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have many people like that. They are senior vice chair of the think tank of CCG. For example, Mr. Cao Wang is a very famous Chinese entrepreneur. He's a big donor to our think tank also. He has 5 factory in the United States. Yeah. He has another 4 or 5 in Europe and other countries, and many. He's an auto glass king. He occupies almost 40-50% of the global market. He knows international. That's why he supports the international think tank. He what CCG is doing between China and the United States on the friendly exchanges with China and Europe on the friendly exchanges. His company benefiting this globalization and the global market, and then that's why he supports. And another example is this James Leong. He's the founder of Trips.com, which is also one largest online travel company in the world. And he's also a scholar. He got a PhD from Stanford. Very much enjoying the CCG work. And we do a lot of things together. We all call for open travel, the green card, and less restriction on visas, simplified visa applications. We actually he supported some studies on foreigners traveling to China. And we find that the foreigners traveling to China has declined since last decade, and which is unusual. China is booming, and all the infrastructure, traffic, and transportation are all best ever. How come the people travel has declined? So we found out the reason for that, and we issued a report. We announced to the world, and we encourage government to make measures to correct that. So you can see, even some of those entrepreneurs who support us is really appreciate the CCG can do public good, can really find out the things that impact the Chinese globalization development, can really lift some of those barriers, and CCG can really do better. And particularly, during the COVID, we had the 3 times visit outside China while China is still under COVID control. That was really appreciated by many people in China. They were saying, you send a signal, you are the ambassadors, you are the icebreakers, you were the first group of Chinese there to go out and engage the world and welcome people from the world to visit China. They really, we received so many positive feedback. And so those people really support our think tank and appreciate the work we've been doing. So that's where I think we are also maintain a very good relation with all the peoples in the country, and so that's why we can maintain our think tank autonomy as well, to find the issues to going forward.
So is it fair to say that you or your colleagues interact with these entrepreneurs or their colleagues very often, like in a very often interaction, high frequent?
Well, we don't have to really interact with them a lot. We have a fundraising department, so they are specialized in fundraising, in talking to those entrepreneurs, those corporate members. Of course, we do have meetings, like we have a China Global Entrepreneurial Forum annually, and we invite all those council members and to come, and also we provide a channel for them to talk with different departments on certain policy issues, but more or less we are also improving this all the better environment. For example, we promote globalization, which they benefit. We promote openness. They really find that is absolutely important. We promote reform. They are really so we have really value-wise. We share a lot of their value. They share a lot of our values. And also, I have to say, the Chinese entrepreneurs now are realizing doing the charity work, not just supporting the poor village children to have a better school, but also supporting a think tank to have a better education policy. That's also a charity work. So that really has getting more widely accepted now. So we have actually better fine channels from those entrepreneurs who support us. So it's a truly international model of running a think tank in China. I'm glad that CCG's practice and work has made things work out. And we are not only appreciated by people inside China, but also appreciated by people outside China, and particularly the international community, and working with all the think tanks, all the major forums, and all the government. We'll be meeting. They all appreciate the work CCG has done.
Yeah, and I hope more people can know about what CCG has done, because they're all great things. And you seem to be constantly on the go. I'm just curious, how much time do you spend on your work, like every day or week? Do you have like a typical day you can share with us, or is your every day just different? And how do you maintain your energy and motivation?
Well, we got a pretty busy day. There's a lot of work we've been doing. For example, I can give you example. One of the typical day last week, for example. Last week we there's in the morning we had the meetings. Office meeting. We have visitors from different countries, and for example, we received a large delegate from Australia. Also, Australia-China Chamber of Commerce, Australia Global Foundation, and Australian ambassador to Beijing. So we hosted a roundtable in our office here. Last week, and then there's another day we had an event which is very very hectic. We have there's one afternoon that I had to go 4 events.
4 events.
4 meetings. And then I had this, China International Publishing House has set up an international Orchard Award, Lanhua Orchard Award, and I was the evaluating members, and I spent half day, marking all those candidates, very famous people around the world, that they're building up this new award. But I can't go to the dinner, and then that evening I was invited by South Africa ambassador to celebrate China South Africa for 25 years of the diplomatic relations. So I went to Kempinski Hotel in Beijing to really attending this celebration event and meet the South African ambassador and many ambassadors there. And after that, I have to rush to the German center in Beijing. Then the German Director General of the German Environment Protection Agency was in Beijing giving a talk that evening. I was enlisted as one of discussing with them. So we talked with him and we meet him. So I went that event, and then later on I went back home. CCG and ISPI and another European think tank, 3 think tanks, formed an online webinar and symposium on China after COVID, China-EU relations. So we had people from European think tanks, from myself from China, which is China is among the 3 think tanks co-host this event. So I have to give some talk there until very late in 11 o'clock, something like 10:30. So you can see
very intense.
Yeah, very intense. I have to run 4 places in one evening. When I get out of the China International Hotel as this evaluation committee, it's already 6 o'clock. I rushed to Kempinski.
Is the traffic good?
Before 7, I spent half hour there. I went to the German Environment Agency Minister, seminar for another half hour, 1 hour, and then I went back home for this webinar for another an hour and a half. So it's quite intense. China CCG is often because sorted after, because we have to be there sometime.
And I also noticed that in February this year, the U.S. media outlet Semafor and CCG launched the China and Global Business Platform with events in Beijing and New York and the coverage across CCG's digital channels for global business leaders seeking a way forward amid the growing costs in the U.S. for economic decoupling from China and China's parallel pursuit of economic self-reliance. The inaugural China and Global Business events will take place in Beijing on October 17th to 19th, preceded by an initial convening this June in New York City. So how is the preparation going with these events? Are there any other key work arrangements for CCG this year that you can introduce and share with our audience?
No, thank you. That's a good point too, because we felt, U.S. and China are 2 largest economy, and we have so many complementary, business relations. And U.S. is always the pioneer in innovation and science and technology, and also financial capability. U.S. is the number 1 in the world, and so there's many things China can learn. So I think it's important to maintain this business-to-business relationship. That's why this Semafor group, which is a very new media that founded by former CEO of Bloomberg Media, Justin Smith, which is a good friend, and so I invited him to come to Beijing in February. We actually, worked together. I met him during my visit to U.S. last July. It's one of the outcome of our eye-speaking visit during the pandemic. So we come to understanding we should really promote in the business exchanges between China and U.S. After all, there's already 70,000 U.S. companies set up in China, generating 700 billion revenues every year. We shouldn't let that, really decouple. We should really continue to work together, and because it's benefiting, both countries. And so I think what we have come to the understanding is that we will have this China and the Global Business Forum, and will be organized by Semafor and CCG, and we're going to invite business, people, companies around the world, particularly from U.S. and China, to really have a conference together to find out opportunities to, promote the exchanges and strengthen the cooperation. which is, I think, beneficial to the world. And so the meeting will be conducted this year on October 17, 18 in Beijing. I think in June it was too soon that we had online consultations, but now we are having the real thing in Beijing in July 17 and October 17 and 18. So I think it's very good, that we have more business coming. For example, on China Development Forum that we just held in March, we had over a dozen U.S. CEOs come, 17 global CEOs come to China. And then when President Macron come, we have 50 European CEOs come. When the President of Brazil come, we had 250 business people come. So you can see a growing interest of international community on China. So it's probably a good time for U.S. and Semafor and China CCG that we organize something to facilitate these global business exchanges. So I felt that this is also another thing that we should not separate. We should really, work together. Although we have a lot of differences, we have a lot of misunderstanding, but let's, business language is really understood by all the business people, and then that's really the bedrock of all the relationship we have. We should continue that and benefit in the developing world, benefit in the whole, developing process, and avoid misunderstanding and avoid. I still believe the economic globalization is the best, vehicle to prevent the military globalization. It's really important that we strengthen the economic globalization, cooperation, and have a healthy Olympic-style competition, and rather than the very drastic, rivalry competition. So I think this is important that we have the chance to work with international organizations like that, and also we're also working with UN. We work with World Bank. We actually hosted the World Bank to release their Global Economic Outlook report 3 years in a row during the pandemic. They issue that twice a year. The only issue in Washington, and then the other issue is online with CCG in Beijing. Only 2 issues. So we've been doing that for the last 3 years. So there's many international organizations we work with. We hope that our conference in October will be a successful one.
And before I let you go, we invite every guest of our podcast to recommend something to our listeners. It can be a book, a movie, a TV series, a podcast, or even a video game. I'm sure you have lots of things, books to recommend for us. So do you have any specific recommendation for us today, like for a book or? Yeah, no,
I'd love to recommend maybe 2 books. Mm-hmm. One is this CCG Global Dialogue. Mm-hmm. That is a free download, actually. The dialogue collected, over 15, heavy, weight international, opinion leaders, articles, papers, and dialogue, particularly the dialogue I had with them, and it's really a good reading between such dynamic China-U.S., China-outside relations. Another book is just the book we published last week. It's Soft Power and Great Power Competition that we edited for Professor Joseph Nye, and he actually had a number of his recent essays, op-eds, and papers and speeches that collected into this book. And also, I wrote a preface for that in the Chinese version, but also in the English version, the first article is the dialogue he had with me a year ago. So those 2 books are really most recent, and I would really highly recommend.
Thank you. I will take some time to read that, and thank you so much for taking time to have this podcast show with me. I really appreciate your work, the CCG's work in helping bridge China and the rest of the world, and I hope your next trip bridging the China and the rest of the world can be very smooth. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your interview.
Thank you. The Ginger River Radio Podcast is a part of the GR Media Outlet. Our show is produced and edited by me, Jiang Jiang, Yu Liaojie from Shanghai International Studies University, and Jia Yuxuan from Beijing Foreign Studies University. For cooperation, investing, or feedback, email me directly at jiangjiang, jiang, @gingerriver.com, or just give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. We would be delighted if you would recommend our podcast or newsletter to others if you find it helpful. Thank you for listening, and see you next time. Take care.